right now. As you are listening to this, there is a voice inside your head, quietly speaking, reacting, commenting on everything. It noticed the first word of this sentence before you even decided to pay attention. And right now, it is either agreeing with what is being said, or it is quietly pushing back, forming an opinion, constructing a response that no one asked it to give. Have you ever paused, truly paused, and asked yourself, where does that voice come from? Because most people never do. Most people spend their entire lives completely identified with that voice, believing it is them, believing every word it says, following every trail of thought it lays down like breadcrumbs into a forest that never ends. And yet, here you are, lying still, perhaps in the dark, perhaps with your eyes closed or softly open, and that voice is still going, still narrating, still running its quiet commentary on the world, on you, on this very moment. Welcome to the channel, Thoughts of Alan Watts, where we explore the quiet and profound wisdom of one of the most remarkable philosophical voices of the 20th century. A man who spent his life pointing at something most of us walk past every single day without ever noticing. If what you are hearing tonight resonates with something deep inside you, take a moment to like this video and share your thoughts in the comments below. Because the conversation that happens in the space beneath thinking, that is the most important conversation of all. Now, let yourself settle. Let the weight of the day begin to soften. Let your body sink just a little deeper into wherever you are resting. Because what we are about to explore together is not something you need to think hard about. In fact, the harder you try to think about it, the further away it becomes. What we are exploring tonight is the nature of the very thing that is trying to understand itself, the mind. Looking at the mind, awareness, becoming aware of awareness. And in that strange loop, something begins to open up. Something quiet, something that was always there, just beneath the noise. Let us begin at the very beginning. Not the beginning of your life, not the beginning of this evening, but the beginning of this present moment, which is the only beginning there ever actually is. Right now, there is sound, there is sensation, there is the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, and there is, underneath all of it, something that is simply aware. Something that receives all of this, the sounds, the feelings, the thoughts themselves, without needing to say a single word about any of it. That something, that quiet receiver, that open space of pure noticing. That is what we are going to spend this evening gently turning toward. But here's the strange part. Every time you try to look directly at that awareness, the voice in your head rushes in and starts talking about it. It says things like, "Am I doing this right? What is awareness supposed to feel like? I think I felt it for a second, or maybe that was just drowsiness." And in doing so, it completely obscures the very thing you were trying to find. It is like trying to see your own eyes. You can look at everything around you with extraordinary clarity, but the very instrument of seeing cannot see itself directly. You can catch your reflection in a mirror. You can deduce its existence from the seeing itself, but it always remains just out of reach of its own direct gaze. Alan Watts understood this with a depth and a playfulness that very few Western thinkers ever achieved. He spent decades sitting with this paradox, this marvelous and maddening loop in which consciousness tries to grab hold of itself, and in doing so, always slips just past its own fingers. He used to say something that sounds simple at first, but the longer you sit with it, the more it begins to glow with a strange inner light. He would say, "You cannot get out of your own skin," and that the great spiritual traditions of the world, East and West alike, were all essentially pointing toward the same recognition, that the self you believe yourself to be, the self that the voice in your head is constantly reinforcing and defending and explaining, is not actually the deepest truth of what you are. Now, I want you to try something very gentle. Do not strain, do not effort. Simply notice, for just a moment, that you are listening to these words, and that there is a part of you that is doing the listening, without commentary. There is a part of you that is simply here, open, receiving, like a wide, still lake at midnight, reflecting the stars without trying to hold them. Can you feel that, even slightly? That openness, that quiet, that presence that does not need to say anything to be real. That is where we are going tonight. Not in some dramatic spiritual sense, not through great effort or discipline, but simply through the gentle art of noticing what is already here. Very few people ever realize this, but the voice in your head has never once been silent in your waking life. From the moment you first became aware of your surroundings as a small child, that voice began its narration, and it has been going ever since. It has an opinion about everything. It replays conversations from 3 years ago. It rehearses arguments that will never take place. It invents catastrophes in the middle of the night. It whispers criticism so subtle and so constant that you have come to accept them as simply true. And here is what makes this so fascinating and so quietly revolutionary. You did not choose any of those thoughts, not a single one. They arose on their own. They appeared out of the silence, the way waves appear on the surface of the ocean, not because someone reached down and sculpted them, but because that is simply what water does when certain conditions are present. Think about that for a moment. When was the last time you decided what your next thought would be before thinking it? You cannot. You cannot predict your next thought any more than you can predict the exact shape of the next wave. You can steer. You can focus. You can redirect attention in a general direction, but the actual arising of thought, that wild, spontaneous bubbling up of images and words and memories and feelings, that is not something you are doing. It is something that is happening to you, through you, in you. And this is where everything begins to change. Because if you did not create your thoughts, if they arise spontaneously from some process you do not control and cannot fully observe, then in what sense are they you? In what sense is the voice in your head actually your voice? Alan Watts posed questions like these not to create anxiety, not to make the ground feel unstable beneath our feet, but for exactly the opposite reason. He was pointing at something liberating, something that could dissolve a great deal of the suffering that comes from our relentless identification with the chattering mind. He often described the predicament of modern Western consciousness like this. We have been taught since birth to identify entirely with the ego, with this constructed narrative self, this ongoing story we tell ourselves about who we are, where we came from, what we want, what we fear, what we deserve. And we have come to believe, with tremendous conviction, that this story, this narrative, this voice is what we really are. But consider this. The story is told in language, and language is something you learned. You were not born with English or whatever tongue you first heard. You were born into pure sensation, into raw awareness without labels, without categories, without a name for yourself or anything else. And gradually, word by word, concept by concept, the world was named for you, and you learned to inhabit that naming, to take it for reality itself. There was an old Zen story that Watts loved to reference. A student comes to a master and says, "I have been practicing meditation for years, and I still cannot quiet my mind." The master pours tea into the student's cup and keeps pouring as it overflows, running across the table and onto the floor. The student says, "Stop, the cup is full." And the master says, "Exactly. How can you receive anything new when you are already so full of what you think you know?" The mind full of constant talk, constant commentary, constant judgment and categorization is like that overflowing cup. It has no room for the direct experience of life itself. It is always one step removed, always translating experience into language before allowing itself to feel it, always filing sensations under known categories before giving them space to be surprising, to be new, to be themselves. And yet, and this is the extraordinary part, awareness itself is never full. Awareness is more like the sky than like the cup. The sky does not fill up with clouds. No matter how dense the cloud cover, the sky itself remains vast and open and untouched behind it all. The clouds move, they form, they dissolve. But the sky, the sheer unbounded openness of the sky, that is never altered by anything that passes through it. Your awareness, the part of you that is simply here, simply witnessing, simply knowing that experience is happening right now, that awareness is more like the sky. The thoughts pass through it like clouds. Some days the clouds are thick and dark, and you cannot see the sky at all from beneath them. But the sky has not changed. The sky has not become the cloud. Let yourself rest in this image for a moment. Let it be not an intellectual exercise, but a felt sense. If you can, let your body soften. Let your breath slow just slightly. And see if there is something in you that recognizes this sky-like quality in itself, a kind of openness that is always there, even on the most turbulent mental days, even in the midst of anxiety or grief or the relentless noise of an overactive mind. That recognition, however faint, however fleeting, is not nothing. In fact, according to many of the great contemplative traditions that Watt spent his life studying and translating for Western audiences, that recognition is everything. That glimpse of the sky through a brief parting of the clouds, that is what the mystics were pointing at. That is what the Zen masters spent lifetimes trying to transmit, not through elaborate doctrine, but through direct pointing, direct seeing. Look, right here, right now, this. But here's the strange part. We are extraordinarily well trained to look everywhere except here. Our culture trains us from birth to look forward and backward in time, to compare the present moment against imagined futures and remembered pasts, to always be oriented toward somewhere other than where we actually are. We spend enormous energy trying to arrive at a moment in the future where we will finally feel okay, finally feel settled, finally feel like we have figured it all out. And the voice in our head is the primary instrument of this endless departure from the present. It is always saying, when this is over, when I have solved this problem, when I have enough money, when I am in a better relationship, when I have meditated enough, when I am calmer, then I will be able to rest. Then I will be able to enjoy my life. Then I will be at peace. And the bitter irony, the one that Watts pointed out with great compassion and sometimes great humor, is that there is no future moment in which peace will finally arrive. Peace is not a destination. Peace is what is here when you stop running from here. He used to compare it to a man on a train who is so desperate to arrive at his destination that he gets up and tries to push the train from inside the carriage. He cannot understand why the train is moving so slowly. He exhausts himself pushing against the inner walls and does not notice that the train is already moving perfectly well without his effort, or that the landscape outside the window is extraordinarily beautiful, if only he would stop pushing long enough to look. We are all on that train. The voice in your head is the man pushing. It believes with tremendous sincerity that its constant effort, its constant planning and worrying and rehearsing and replaying is what keeps things moving, that without its vigilance, something terrible would happen. Things would fall apart. You would miss something crucial. You would fail to prepare for some disaster that surely must be coming. And in a very limited sense, the voice is not entirely wrong. There is a time and a place for planning, for analytical thinking, for strategic consideration of the future. These are real and useful capacities. Watts was never arguing that we should abandon thought entirely. He was not romanticizing mindlessness. He was drawing a distinction, a crucial distinction, between thought as a tool and thought as a tyrant, between the mind in service of life and the mind as a compulsive machine that cannot stop even when stopping would serve us better. The question he was always circling was not how to stop thinking, but who is it that is doing the thinking, and who is it that is aware of the thinking happening? Because these two things, thinking and the awareness of thinking, are not the same thing. and in the space between them, something very quiet, very still, and very free begins to reveal itself. Let us stay with this for a moment. Right now, thoughts are probably arising in your mind, words, images, reactions to what is being said, perhaps a memory that got triggered, perhaps a doubt or a question, perhaps the voice commenting on the voice commenting on the thoughts. It can become quite dizzying when you start to notice all the layers. But here is the question. Who is noticing? Who is aware that all of this is happening? Whatever thoughts are arising, whatever the voice is saying, whoever you imagine yourself to be in this moment, there is clearly something that is aware of all of it. Something that is here, present, witnessing. That something does not need to announce itself. It does not have a name or a story. It just is, quietly and completely, and without any effort at all. In the Vedantic tradition of India, one of the great spiritual philosophies that Alan Watts studied deeply and loved to weave into his talks, this witnessing awareness is called the Atman, the true self, the self that underlies all the changing contents of experience, the thoughts and feelings and sensations that come and go like weather, while the Atman, like the sky, remains always and ever itself. And the great teaching, the one that Watts found so revolutionary and so liberating, was that this Atman, this witnessing awareness, is not separate from the ground of all being, the vast universal consciousness that some traditions call Brahman, or the Tao, or God, or simply the real. In the deepest sense, the tradition says, you are not a small, separate self, having an experience of a universe that exists outside and independent of you. You are the universe, experiencing itself from this particular point of view. Now, the voice in your head finds this deeply suspicious. It says, that sounds very poetic, but I have a mortgage and a difficult relationship, and my back hurts, and I cannot afford to dissolve into cosmic oneness right now. And that is fair. That is completely fair. Because the voice in your head is the voice of the local self, the everyday self, the practical, navigating self that has to deal with traffic and taxes and difficult conversations and all the very real textures of a human life. Watts was not asking you to abandon that self. He was not suggesting that the ordinary human concerns of your life are somehow illusions to be transcended. He had a more elegant and more useful suggestion. He was suggesting that the ordinary human self, the voice in the head, the narrative ego, is like a whirlpool in a river. It has a definite form. It has a definite character. It behaves in recognizable ways. It has a kind of persistence and identity. And yet, if you look closely, a whirlpool is not a thing separate from the river. It is the river, doing a particular thing in a particular place, in a particular way. And when you understand that, you can be fully and completely and committedly yourself, your full, ordinary human self, while simultaneously knowing that you are not only that. Something about that understanding, about that dual knowledge, changes the quality of being alive in a way that is very difficult to put into words, but which you may have tasted briefly in certain moments, perhaps in nature, when you were looking at something vast, a mountain range, an ocean, a star-filled sky, and for a moment the self-consciousness dropped away, and there was just the seeing, just the immense presence of what was there, and something in you that was equally present, equally immense, equally open. Or perhaps in music, in those moments when the beauty of sound becomes so complete that you forget to listen as a separate listener, and the music simply moves through you, like wind through an open window. And for those few seconds, there is no difference between the music and the hearing and the self that hears. It is all one undivided happening. Or perhaps in the moment just before sleep, in that dissolving borderland between waking and dreaming, when the thoughts begin to lose their sharp edges, when the voice in your head starts to blur and slow, when the rigid boundaries of the self soften and the awareness begins to open and expand, and there is something spacious and peaceful and profoundly okay about it. Simply being here, dissolving, letting go. That quality, that tone of experience, is what the contemplative traditions have been pointing at for thousands of years, not as something exotic or difficult to achieve, but as the natural condition of awareness when it is not being aggressively contracted into the tight fist of egoic self-protection. And here is what is remarkable. That quality is available right now, not after more practice, not after reading more books, not after sorting out all your problems, not after becoming a better meditator or a calmer person or a more enlightened being. It is available right now because it is not something you have to create or achieve. It is something you have to stop obscuring. Very few people ever notice this. But what we call spiritual practice, what we call meditation, what we call the contemplative life, is not actually the addition of something new to your experience. It is more like a very careful and patient and gentle removal of the layers of assumption and compulsive mental activity that cover over a clarity that was always already there. Think of a still pond covered with dead leaves in autumn. The leaves do not create the water. They do not make the water murky from the inside. They simply rest on the surface and prevent you from seeing the depth beneath. When the wind carries the leaves away, the water does not become clear. It reveals the clarity that was always its nature. It was always transparent, all the way to the bottom. The leaves were never in the water. They were just on top of it. Your essential awareness is like that water. The voice in your head, the thoughts and stories and self-narratives and worries, these are like the leaves on the surface. They do not contaminate the depths. They simply obscure them. And when they are seen for what they are, when they are recognized as leaves and not as the self, they begin to settle, to slow, to quiet, and the depth reveals itself. Now let us explore something that I think you will find deeply interesting. Something that Watts came back to again and again in his lectures and his writing. The question of why the voice never stops. Why is the mind so persistently verbal, so relentlessly narrative? Why does it need to talk so much? What is it so afraid of encountering in the silence? Part of the answer lies in the function of language itself. Language is a system of separation. Every word creates a boundary. It says, this thing, and not that thing. Cat, and not dog. Self, and not other. Good, and not bad. Words carve the seamless flow of experience into discrete, named chunks, and this is tremendously useful. Without this capacity for distinction and categorization, we could not communicate, we could not plan, we could not build the extraordinary complexity of human civilization. But it comes with a profound cost. The cost is that we begin to mistake the map for the territory. We begin to live inside the language about experience, rather than inside the experience itself. We begin to relate to the world through the names we have given it, rather than through direct contact with the living reality of it. A child who does not yet have the word for tree does not see less of the tree. In some respects, they see more. They see the extraordinary particular thisness of this specific tree, the way its bark catches the low winter light, the small movements of its highest branches in the wind, the particular quality of stillness it embodies. Without the word to file it under, the child cannot quickly categorize and move on. The child has to actually be with the tree, actually encounter it, actually receive it. We lose this capacity as we learn language, not entirely, but substantially. We learn to see categories rather than particulars. We learn to experience life through the fast-moving slideshow of conceptual recognition, rather than through the slower, deeper engagement of direct encounter. And the voice in our head is the narrator of that slideshow, the endless commentator who says, tree, bird, pretty, boring, significant, irrelevant, like, dislike. And in doing so, processes experience at tremendous speed, while simultaneously never quite touching it. Watt spoke about this in terms of the Eastern concept of Maya, which is sometimes translated as illusion, but which more precisely means something like the world as seen through the separating lens of conceptual thought. Maya is not the suggestion that the physical world is not real. It is the suggestion that the world as we conceptually parse it, as neatly divided into separate named things, is not the full truth of reality. Reality is more like music than like a photograph of a music score. It is alive, flowing, undivided, and the notes only exist in relation to each other. He had a beautiful way of describing this. He would say, imagine that you are listening to a piece of music, and you are so focused on understanding the music intellectually, analyzing the harmony, identifying the key changes, categorizing the form, that you completely miss the actual music as it is happening. You know a great deal about the music, but you have not heard it, not really, not the way a child hears it, who knows nothing about music theory, but who feels the music move through them like a warm current. And then he would say, "This is how most of us relate to our own lives. We are so busy thinking about our lives, narrating our lives, evaluating and categorizing and planning our lives, that the actual experience of being alive, the direct, raw, unmediated fact of existing right now, in this precise and unrepeatable moment, passes by largely untasted." There was a Zen saying that Watts loved: "Before enlightenment, chop wood and carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood and carry water." The activities do not change. The outer circumstances of life remain essentially the same. What changes is the quality of presence with which those activities are met, the complete and undivided attention brought to the act of chopping wood, the full arrival in the sensation of the axe in the hands, the sound of the split wood, the smell of the fresh-cut grain, without the voice running its running commentary about how much more wood needs to be chopped, or how tired the arms are, or what we are going to have for dinner. This is not a dramatic, mystical state. This is not a rare attainment available only to monastics or great yogis. This is, in fact, the most natural thing in the world, and children do it constantly. You did it constantly before you learned how to construct a verbal self. The capacity for full sensory presence, for complete and undistracted arrival in the actual moment, that was your natural state before the voice in your head developed enough to take over. And here is something beautiful about what we are doing right now, in this very moment. The simple act of gently directing attention to the question of who is hearing these words, who is aware of the thoughts that arise as these words are heard. This simple act is already a movement in the direction of that natural openness. You do not have to go anywhere. You do not have to become anything. You do not have to achieve a special state. You just have to notice what is already and always here. The awareness in which everything appears. Let us go a little deeper into the question of control, because this is often where the voice in the head gets most insistent, most defended, most anxious. The voice in your head is deeply invested in the belief that it is in control, that it is running the show, that it is the author of your choices and the architect of your life. And when this belief is examined closely, something very interesting and slightly vertiginous begins to happen. Ask yourself, did you choose to be born? Did you choose your parents, your culture, your native language, your earliest experiences, the temperament you came into the world with, the particular configuration of neural patterns that determines so much of how you process experience, the deep grooves of habit and response that were laid down in those early years before you had any conscious say in the matter? Of course you did not. You arrived into a world and a self that were already largely formed, already in motion, already determining the conditions of your experience. Did you choose to feel hungry when you are hungry, or tired when you are tired? Did you choose which experiences would move you to tears, which music would give you that strange, full chest feeling, Which faces would make something warm happen in your heart? These things arise. They happen to you. They are not decisions you make. Even your thoughts. Go back to this one more time, because it is so important and so easy to slide past. Can you tell me what your next thought will be before it arises? Can you write down the content of a thought that you have not yet had? Of course you cannot. The thought arises. You observe it or are swept up in it, but you did not choose it. It was not constructed by some executive self, sitting behind a desk making decisions about which thoughts to dispatch. Watts had a wonderful phrase for this. He called it the backwards law. The idea that the harder you try to control or improve or achieve something in the psychological realm, the more you guarantee its opposite. The more you try to be calm, the more agitated you become. The more you try to fall asleep, the more awake you feel. The more you try to stop thinking, the louder the thinking gets. This is because the very act of trying assumes a controller, assumes a self that stands apart from the experience and manages it from outside. And the belief in that separate controller is exactly what creates the agitation in the first place. It is the sense of being at war with your own experience, of needing your experience to be different from what it is. That generates the suffering, not the experience itself. There is a beautiful paradox here, and it is one of the central paradoxes that all genuine spiritual teachings point toward in one form or another. The relaxation you are seeking, the peace, the quiet, the sense of being fundamentally okay with yourself and your life. These cannot be achieved through effort. They can only arise through a kind of intelligent surrender, through the willingness to stop fighting your experience and simply be with it, fully, openly, without the usual commentary and resistance. This is sometimes called acceptance, but that word can be misunderstood. It does not mean passive resignation. It does not mean you stop acting to change things that need changing. It does not mean you become indifferent to injustice or pain or the real challenges of your life. It means something much more specific and much more subtle. It means that in this present moment, whatever is here, whatever thoughts are arising, whatever sensations are present in the body, whatever emotions are moving through, you are willing to let these be exactly what they are, without adding the extra layer of struggle against them. The pain in your back is pain, but the story about how terrible it is and how it will never get better and what it means about your future and your aging body and all the things you will no longer be able to do, that story is the extra layer. And the extra layer causes far more suffering than the original sensation. The anxious thought is just a thought, an electrical pattern in your brain, a movement of mental energy. But when the voice in your head grabs that thought and begins to argue with it, or to elaborate it into a full catastrophe narrative, or to criticize itself for having it, it becomes a whole drama, and you are lost in that drama for however long it takes to burn itself out. What Watts was proposing, and what the contemplative traditions he drew from were pointing at, is a third possibility. Not the compulsive following of every thought that arises, and not the forceful suppression of thought, but a spacious witnessing, a quality of attention that is like light. It illuminates whatever it touches, but it does not grab. It does not push away. It simply shines. And in the shining, in the clear witnessing, the thought is seen as a thought and not as reality. And that distinction is the beginning of freedom. Alan Watts used to laugh at this, not unkindly, but with a kind of deep delight in the absurdity of the situation we are all in. He would say, "You are not in trouble. You are not broken. You are not failing at life, or failing at meditation, or failing at being a good enough person. You are simply confused about what you are. You have taken yourself to be the voice in your head, the character in the story, the separate self struggling to maintain itself against a threatening universe. And that confusion, that case of mistaken identity, is the source of most of your suffering. And when you begin to see through the confusion, even slightly, even in small glimpses, something begins to relax, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that removes all difficulty from your life, but in a deep and quiet way that changes the texture of everything. The same difficulties may still be present, but you are no longer at war with them in quite the same way. You have a little more room around them, a little more air, a little more of that sky-like quality of open awareness that can hold even the darkest clouds without losing its nature. Let us rest here for a moment. Let the words settle like dust that has been stirred and is now slowly drifting down toward stillness. Let your breath be easy. Let it move without your management of it. Let your body be heavy and warm. Let your eyes stay closed or softly unfocused. And just for a few breaths, see if you can notice the awareness itself. The simple fact of being here, conscious, present, receiving, without adding anything to it, without needing it to be different from what it is. Just here. Just this. Just the gentle warmth of being alive in this moment, which asks nothing of you, which requires no achievement, which is already and always complete. Now, let us move into something that I find endlessly fascinating, and that I think you will too. The question of what happens to the voice in your head while you are dreaming. Because this opens up something very profound about the relationship between awareness and the contents of awareness, and about the question of who you really are. Every night, without exception, the self you believe yourself to be during the day undergoes a remarkable transformation. The voice in your head, the narrator, the identity maintainer, steps aside, or perhaps is itself transformed into something else, and you enter a state in which the most extraordinary things become plausible, in which the rules of ordinary physics and identity become completely fluid, in which you can fly or speak to the dead, or find yourself in places that have never existed, and yet feel more real than anything in waking life. And here is the fascinating thing. You do not lose consciousness during dreaming. You simply lose the ordinary waking state framework of identity. In the dream, things happen to you. You react, you feel, you think, you speak. And yet, that dream you is not constructed by an act of will. It arises spontaneously from the same mysterious depths that produce your thoughts and your inspirations and your intuitions in waking life. Who created the dream? Who wrote the script? Who populated the dream with all those characters and environments and events? You did, in some sense, but not the you that sits at the desk making deliberate decisions. Some deeper intelligence, some level of your being that operates far below the threshold of conscious control, assembled an entire world, complete with sensory detail, emotional texture, narrative logic, and presented it to your awareness as experience. This tells us something extraordinary about the depth of what we are. This tells us that the conscious ego, the voice in the head, the deliberate self-constructing self, is only the surface of something vastly larger and more creative and more mysterious, that we sit atop it like a dinghy on the ocean, largely unaware of the vast depths beneath. Watts loved to point out that the universe that produced you is the same universe that you experience as you, that the processes that created stars and mountains and rivers and forests are the same processes that created this nervous system through which you know the world. You are not a visitor in the universe. You are a growth of the universe. The way a flower is not a visitor in a garden, but an expression of the garden's own nature. The acorn does not have to try to become an oak tree. It does not consult a book about oak treeness and follow the instructions diligently. The becoming is built into the being. The oak is what the acorn does. The universe is what you are, not as some poetic metaphor, but as a literal biological and physical and cosmological fact. And your awareness, this quiet and intimate and immediate knowing that is happening right now, is the universe knowing itself through these particular eyes in this particular moment. Which means that when you look up at the stars are looking at themselves. When you feel the wind on your face, the universe is feeling itself. When you are moved by music, or by beauty, or by love, the cosmos is in some profound sense experiencing its own depths. Very few people ever sit with this long enough to feel it, rather than merely think it. But the feeling of it, even briefly, is like a kind of homecoming, a dissolving of the low-grade sense of alienation and separateness that most of us carry so constantly that we have forgotten it is there. Like someone who has been holding their breath and cannot even remember what it feels like to breathe fully, until one long exhale reminds them. Let yourself exhale now. A long, slow exhale, letting the breath go all the way out, all the way to the bottom. And then let the inhale come on its own, naturally, without forcing it. Just let the body breathe itself, which is, of course, what it has been doing all along without any help from you. The body breathes without you deciding to breathe. The heart beats without you deciding to beat it. The immune system defends against illness without your conscious involvement. Thousands of processes of extraordinary complexity maintain themselves without any instruction from the voice in your head. And yet we have this persistent sense that we are in charge of ourselves, that the ego is the captain of this ship. Watts would say gently but clearly, the ego is not the captain. The ego is something more like the bow wave of the ship. It appears to be leading the way. It appears to be in front, but it is not the engine, and it is not the navigation. It is simply what happens at the front of the vessel as it moves through the water. The idea that the bow wave is steering the ship is as absurd as thinking that your shadow is pulling you along. This is not meant to diminish you. Please hear this carefully. This is not a teaching about how you don't matter, or how free will is a complete illusion, or how nothing you do makes any difference. These are not the conclusions Watts drew, and they are not what the wisdom traditions are teaching. They are pointing at something subtler and more interesting. They are pointing at the difference between the small self and the large self, between the ego that fights for control and the deeper intelligence that actually animates and sustains the whole. They are saying that you do not need to carry the burden of total self-authorship, because that burden is both impossible to carry and unnecessary. The river knows how to flow. The tree knows how to grow. The universe knows how to universe. And you, whatever you truly are, know how to be you, without the voice in your head having to manage every moment of it. And here is where this becomes very practical, very relevant to the life you are actually living. When you over-identify with the voice in your head, when you believe that you are your thoughts and your thoughts are you, you inherit all of that voice's anxiety, all of its need to control, all of its fear of uncertainty, all of its defensiveness, all of its relentless comparison of how things are with how things should be. This is exhausting, and it is the primary cause of the kind of chronic, low-grade tension that so many people live with and mistake for simply how life feels. But when you begin to loosen that identification, when you begin to see the voice as something happening in you rather than something that is you, something begins to relax at a very deep level. Not because your circumstances change, not because the voice stops talking, but because you are no longer quite so completely at its mercy. You have a little more distance, a little more perspective, a little more of that sky-like quality that can hold the weather without becoming it. Let me tell you a story that Watts sometimes used in different forms. A story about a man who was convinced that he was in tremendous danger. He was at a dinner party, and he suddenly felt absolutely certain that something terrible was about to happen, that the room was about to collapse, that there was some invisible threat closing in from all sides. His heart raced, his palms sweated. His mind generated one catastrophic scenario after another. A friend sat with him quietly and said nothing for a long time. Then she asked, "What are you actually experiencing right now? Not what you are thinking will happen, but what is actually happening in this moment?" He looked around. The walls were solid. The other guests were laughing. The lights were warm and steady. His body was safe in its chair. Nothing was actually happening except the experience of the fear itself. and she said gently, "The fear is real. The thoughts about what you fear are real. But the thing you are afraid of is not here. It is a story in your head. And you are so completely inside that story that it is more real to you than the room you are actually sitting in." Something shifted for him in that moment. Not dramatically, not all at once, but something. A small opening appeared between him and the fear. He could feel the fear without being identical to it. He could watch the frightening thoughts without being entirely carried away by them. And in that small gap between experience and identification with experience, something that felt remarkably like safety appeared. Real safety. Not the imaginary safety of having controlled all possible threats, but the genuine safety of being rooted in what is actually here, rather than lost in what is only imagined. This is what Watts meant when he spoke about presence, and what the meditation traditions mean when they speak about mindfulness. Not a special state you achieve through correct practice, but the simple and always available act of returning to what is actually here, to the texture of the present moment, to the truth of the body, to the reality of the room, to the direct experience of being alive right now, as opposed to the mental movie about being alive sometime in the future or the past. And what you discover when you do this, when you genuinely come back to the present moment with full and open attention, is that the present moment is almost never actually a problem. The present moment is just what it is: sensation, sound, breath, the aliveness of the body, the quiet of the room. When you strip away the story about it, when you stop the voice's narration for even a few seconds, what remains is almost always perfectly okay. Often it is much more than okay. Often it is quietly astonishing. Right now, as you lie here in the darkness or the soft light, as the sounds of the world move around you, as your body breathes and your heart beats, and the miracle of consciousness just continues. Something is deeply and completely right about this moment. There is nothing wrong with the actual present tense reality of right now. The suffering, if there is suffering, is almost entirely in the story the voice is telling about it. And stories can change. Stories can slow down. Stories can eventually, for a little while, fall silent. There is a teaching in the Taoist tradition that Watts explored with great love throughout his career. It is the teaching of Wu Wei, which is sometimes translated as non-action or non-forcing, and which points at something that Western minds often find puzzling or even suspicious at first. Wu Wei is not passivity. It is not laziness. It is not the abandonment of engagement with life. It is something much more like the action of water. Water does not force its way. Water yields to every obstacle, flows around every rock, seeks the lowest place, follows the path of least resistance. And yet water carves canyons. It reaches the sea. It nourishes every living thing. It is perhaps the most powerful force on earth. not despite its softness, but because of it. The sage in the Taoist tradition acts with this quality of wu-wei, not pushing, not forcing, not imposing their will on reality, but moving with reality, being responsive to it, allowing themselves to be used by it, the way a skilled dancer is used by the music, not controlling the music, but following it so completely and so sensitively that the following becomes its own form of leadership. This quality of not forcing, of allowing, of moving with rather than against, is exactly what is available to you in this moment in relation to your own mind. Instead of fighting the voice in your head, instead of adding the extra layer of self-criticism for having so many thoughts, instead of gripping harder trying to achieve mental silence, what if you simply allowed the thoughts to be there, without following them too seriously, without identifying them as you, letting them arise, letting them pass, like leaves on the surface of a moving stream. The stream does not get upset about the leaves. The stream is simply streaming, and the leaves appear on its surface and drift and are carried forward and eventually pass. The stream remains the stream, clear and moving and deeply itself, regardless of what rests on its surface. You are the stream, not the leaves. The leaves are the thoughts, the voice, the stories, the plans and worries and memories and judgments, all of it drifting on the surface of something that is itself far more quiet, far more clear, far more simply itself than any of those contents. And as you allow this image to settle in, as you allow yourself to be the stream rather than the leaves, something very interesting may begin to happen. The leaves may begin to thin out. The thoughts may begin to lose some of their urgency. The voice may begin to soften. Not because you forced it to, not because you successfully suppressed it, but because you stopped feeding it with your resistance. You stopped arguing with it. You stopped trying to silence it. You simply watched, openly and without judgment, and the watching itself became a kind of effortless releasing. This is one of the most counterintuitive discoveries a human being can make about their own mind. The more you resist a thought, the stronger it becomes. The more you argue with the voice, the more it argues back. The more you try not to think about something, the more insistently it presents itself. But when you simply observe, when you allow the thought to be there without grabbing it or pushing it away, it tends to do something remarkable. It slows, it softens, and eventually, in its own time, it passes. Like a wave reaching the shore, the wave spends its whole existence surging toward land, and when it finally arrives, it does not crash and then immediately reform and crash again. It rolls up the beach and gently, gracefully, pulls back into the ocean, becomes the ocean again, merges with the vast, undifferentiated water from which it arose. Your thoughts are waves. They arise from the deep ocean of consciousness. They travel for a while. They reach your awareness. They do what they do. And if you do not grab them and hold them and argue with them and worry about them, they pull back and are reabsorbed, and the ocean remains deep and quiet and profoundly undisturbed beneath all its surface motion. Let us explore something else now, something that Watts came back to with great frequency and great delight. The question of why human beings are so afraid of silence, of emptiness, of the spaces between thoughts. Because if you pay attention, you will notice that there is something in us that becomes almost instantly uncomfortable with genuine silence. Something that rushes to fill it, with music or conversation, or the phone, or the television, or, most reliably of all, the voice in the head. Have you ever sat in a room with another person and felt the pressure to fill the silence? As if silence itself were somehow wrong? As if it were a kind of failure or awkwardness that needed to be corrected? Or have you ever noticed that the moment you sit down to do nothing, to simply be, the mind immediately generates a list of things that need to be done, a menu of problems to solve, a schedule of activities to execute, as if bare, unoccupied presence were itself intolerable?
Watts had a wonderful observation about this.
He said that modern Western civilization has developed an extraordinary capacity to be entertained and occupied and distracted, and has correspondingly developed an extraordinary intolerance for anything that could be called emptiness. We are addicted to content, to stimulation, to the constant movement of sensory and mental experience, and we are deeply uncomfortable with the spaces in between. But here is what lives in those spaces. Here is what you find if you are willing to be still long enough to let the noise settle. Not emptiness in the sense of nothingness, not a blank void that you fall into without return, but something that feels almost paradoxically like fullness, like richness, like the quality of a deep breath after a long time of shallow breathing, like the felt sense of being profoundly and completely here, which has nothing to do with there being something interesting happening, and everything to do with the quality of attention you are bringing to whatever is present. The Japanese aesthetic tradition has a word for this, ma, which means the pregnant pause, the meaningful space, the silence between the notes of music that gives the notes themselves their beauty and their power. Without the spaces between the notes, music would be one continuous, undifferentiated sound. The spaces are not the absence of music, they are part of the music, essential to its structure, essential to its meaning, essential to its power to move us. Your inner life has its own quality of ma, its own pregnant silences, its own spaces between thoughts, in which something quiet and essential and deeply true can be felt. If you are willing to stay in those spaces, rather than rushing to fill them. Most spiritual traditions agree on this even when they disagree on almost everything else. The contemplative life, the examined life, the life that has been in some sense deliberately lived, involves a cultivated relationship with inner silence, not as an escape from life, but as a deepening into it, as a way of returning again and again to the source of experience before it is filtered through language and judgment and the relentless narration of the voice in the head. In the Christian contemplative tradition, this is called the prayer of silence, the via negativa, the dark night of the soul, the cloud of unknowing, all pointing at a quality of inner openness and receptivity that goes beyond the operations of ordinary discursive mind. In the Buddhist tradition, it is called shamatha, or resting the mind, or the natural state. In the Hindu tradition, it is called turiya, the fourth state of consciousness, the witnessing awareness that underlies waking and dreaming and deep sleep. In the Taoist tradition, it is simply the emptiness that gives all things their usefulness, as a bowl is useful because of its emptiness, as a room is habitable because of its empty space. All of these traditions, despite their extraordinary diversity of culture and language and cosmology, are pointing at the same simple and always available and endlessly profound fact. There is a dimension of your experience right now that is not made of thought. There is a quality of awareness that is prior to and more fundamental than any content that arises within it. And that quality, that ground, that open and receiving sky of consciousness is what you most essentially are. Not the voice, not the story, not the thoughts about yourself, not the judgments and opinions and fears and desires that the voice generates with such consistent productivity, but the awareness in which all of those movements occur, the space in which the dance happens, the silence in which the music sounds. Let yourself breathe with this. Let it not be an intellectual exercise, but something you can feel in the body, because the body has its own kind of knowing, its own kind of intelligence, that is far older and far more direct than the verbal mind. The body knows that it is here before the mind has a chance to name it. The body knows warmth and weight and the gentle rhythm of the breath without needing to translate any of it in the language. Notice the weight of your body right now, wherever you are lying or sitting. Notice the points of contact between your body and the surface beneath you. Notice the texture of that weight, the way gravity is holding you, not aggressively, not pulling you down with any malice, but simply holding, as if the earth itself is cradling you, which of course it is, because you are a part of it, you are made of it, you will return to it. There is something very steadying about feeling into the ground beneath you, into the literal physical fact of the earth supporting your weight. It is a reminder that the universe is not indifferent to your existence. The universe went to extraordinary lengths to produce you, billions of years of cosmic evolution, the precise calibration of physical constants that allows matter to exist and stars to form and planets to circle them, and life to emerge from chemistry and consciousness to arise from life. All of this, every moment of it, was necessary for you to be here right now, listening to these words. You are not an accident. You are not a mistake. You are not an intruder in a universe that does not know you are here. You are the universe, knowing that it is here. Through these eyes, through this awareness, through this particular window of consciousness that has never existed before and will never exist again in quite this same configuration. Watts used to say that you are as necessary to the universe as the universe is to you, that the human eye and the star it gazes at are part of the same system,
that consciousness and the cosmos are not separate things looking at each other from outside. They are one thing that has folded back on itself in such a way that it can
be aware of its own existence, which is, when you let it land fully, perhaps the most astonishing fact in the entire repertoire of facts about reality. Something knows that it exists. Something in the universe, in this enormous, vast, dark, silent, burning, expanding cosmos. Something knows. Something is aware. Right now, right here, in the particular arrangement of matter and energy and information that you are. The universe is aware of itself. And that awareness, that simple and extraordinary capacity for knowing that this is happening, that is what you most fundamentally are. And this awareness, this knowing, this presence, does not need your help to be what it is. It does not need the voice in your head to validate it, or defend it, or improve it. It is simply here, spontaneously, effortlessly, prior to any effort you could make. It was here before you had words for yourself. It will be here after words have become unnecessary. It is the ground of everything you experience, the witness of everything you do, the knowing in which all of your life has unfolded and is unfolding right now. And when you can rest in that, even for a moment, even for a few quiet breaths in the darkness before sleep, something resolves that cannot resolve through thinking about it. Something settles that cannot settle through more planning or more worrying or more analysis. Something that was tight begins to release. Something that was clenched begins to open. Something that was trying very hard to be something begins simply to be. Alan Watts liked to say that the whole secret of life is to be completely engaged with what you are doing in the here and now, and stop thinking about it. And this might sound flippant or even irresponsible to a culture that prizes planning and productivity and forward thinking above almost everything else. But what he meant was precisely what we have been exploring tonight. The liberation that comes from stepping out of the narrative, from dropping the story, from being here with this, right now, completely, without the mediation of the voice in the head. This does not mean never thinking about the future. It means not living there permanently. It does not mean never learning from the past. It means not being trapped in it as a permanent residence. It means that when planning is needed, you plan. And when that is done, you return, naturally and without drama, to the present moment where life actually lives, where the actual texture and color and aliveness of existence is actually happening. And here is something very gentle I want to offer you in this moment. You do not have to figure all of this out tonight. You do not have to achieve some perfect understanding or some final realization or some complete transformation by the time sleep comes. That is the voice talking again, setting up another standard to meet, another performance to deliver, another way to judge whether you are doing this right. There is nothing to do right now except be here. Nothing to achieve, nothing to prove, nothing to figure out.
The only invitation tonight is to rest, to let go, to allow the tension of self-management to loosen, to let the voice in your head slow down and soften as sleep approaches. Not because you forced it to, but because you stopped arguing with it, stopped trying to silence it, simply watched, and in watching, allowed. Let your breath deepen just a little. Let the exhale be just a touch longer than usual. Let there be a small pause after the exhale, before the inhale comes. And in that pause, in that small pocket of emptiness, there is a quality of stillness that is like a tiny open door into something vast and quiet and completely without urgency. You have been carrying a lot. All of us carry more than we realize. The accumulated weight of expectation and judgment and worry and comparison and the relentless sense that we should be somewhere other than where we are. This weight is real. It is not imaginary. It has physical texture. You can feel it in the tightness of the shoulders, in the subtle constriction of the breath, in the low-level restlessness that makes it hard to be fully still. And all of that weight was generated by the voice in your head, every bit of it, not by the actual circumstances of your life, but by the story the voice tells about those circumstances, by the comparison between what is and what the voice believes should be, by the relentless self-evaluation and self-monitoring and self-narration that the voice performs from morning to night without pause. And now, right now, in this quiet hour, you are invited to put down that weight, not permanently, not necessarily, just for tonight, just for this. You can pick it all back up tomorrow if you want to. The worries will still be there. The problems will still be waiting for your attention. The voice will start up again as soon as morning comes, and the ordinary demands of life reassert themselves. But right now, in this particular stretch of darkness and quiet, you do not need any of it. Right now, all you need is this: the breath, the warmth, the slight weight of the body, the darkness behind the eyes, the sound of the world settling into its nighttime rhythms, the awareness that holds all of this gently and without effort. Just this. Now, I want to take you into something that Watts explored toward the end of his career with particular depth and tenderness. And that is the question of what happens in the moment of genuine letting go. Not the willed letting go that is really just another form of control. Not the letting go you do because you think you should, but the spontaneous, organic, unrehearsed falling into ease that sometimes happens by itself when the conditions are right. You may have had this experience, perhaps after a very long period of tension or worry, when something finally resolved, or when you found yourself in a place of such natural beauty that the ordinary concerns of the mind simply went quiet by themselves. Or in the first moments after hearing music that moved you deeply, or in the arms of someone you love completely, when the self-monitoring dropped away and there was just warmth, just presence, just the simple, profound fact of being here together. In those moments, the voice in your head did not narrate the experience. It would have ruined it if it had. The experience was available precisely because the voice was quiet, precisely because the ordinary machinery of self-consciousness had temporarily switched off and left you in direct, unmediated contact with what was actually there. And what is remarkable, what Watts kept pointing at in different ways over and over throughout his long career, is that this quality of direct, unmediated presence, this quality of being fully and completely here without the voice telling you what to think about it, is not a luxury, not a bonus feature of existence that you get to enjoy occasionally when things go your way. It is the most natural thing in the world. It is what awareness does when it is not being turned against itself by the machinery of compulsive thought. The voice in your head is not the enemy. That is a very important thing to understand. The voice is not something to hate or to eliminate or to wage war against. It is a tool that has overstayed its welcome as the dominant mode of experience. It is a function that has mistaken itself for an identity. It is a process that has forgotten that it is a process and begun to think it is a self. When you see this clearly, when you understand the voice not as your enemy, but as a very useful and somewhat confused and deeply anxious servant who has somehow ended up running the house, something softens in you toward it. A kind of compassion arises for the voice, for the ego, for that part of
you that has been working so hard for so long to keep everything under control, to hold everything together, to maintain the story of who you are, to protect and defend and argue and analyze and plan. That part of you has been working so hard, and it is so tired. It does not know how to rest. It has been at it so long that it has forgotten that rest is possible, that it is permitted, that the universe will in fact not fall apart if it stops talking for a little while. And so the invitation is not to fight the voice, not to suppress it or shame it or demand that it be silent, but to hold it gently, the way you would hold a frightened child, not arguing with the fear, not trying to reason it away, just being with it, steady and warm and unfrightened, until the child feels safe enough to slowly, gradually let go of the grip and soften into the warmth of being held. This is what meditation is in its deepest form. Not a technique for suppressing thought, but a quality of presence so steady and so warm and so fundamentally unfrightened that the frightened thinking mind gradually feels safe enough to stop fighting, to put down its weapons, to sink into the ground of awareness, the way a tired child sinks into the arms of someone trustworthy. And in that sinking, in that surrender, in that release of the need to manage and control and understand everything before allowing yourself to rest, something happens that cannot be forced or manufactured or rehearsed. Something opens. Something breathes. Something that was very tightly wound begins to uncoil. And the peace that was always behind the noise reveals itself, not as something you achieved, not as something you created,
but as something that was always here, waiting, patient as the sky, vast as the night, gentle as the darkness before sleep. Let that peace be here now. Let it be real right now, not as a concept, but as a felt quality of this actual moment. Let yourself notice that in this moment, right now, everything is, in fact, okay. The night is doing what nights do. Your body is being held by the bed, and the bed by the floor, and the floor by the earth, and the earth by the vast gravitational embrace of the solar system, and the galaxy, and the cosmos itself. And you are here, breathing, present, alive. And there is nothing that needs to be different from what it is right now, in this actual moment. Everything that seemed urgent 3 hours ago has receded into the distance. The voice that was so loud and insistent during the day has softened in the quiet of this hour. Something in the natural rhythm of existence is already carrying you toward sleep, toward rest, toward the nightly dissolution of the constructed self into something deeper and older and quieter. Let that carry you. Don't swim against it. You don't have to make sleep happen. Sleep is happening. The way the tide comes in without anyone having to push it. The way morning comes without anyone having to turn the world toward the sun. The way leaves fall when autumn arrives, not because they try to fall, but because the time for falling has come, and falling is simply what leaves do in autumn. Sleep is what you do now, not because you are forcing it, not because you are performing the correct sequence of relaxation techniques, but because the time for sleep has come, and sleep is what happens when you stop insisting on being somewhere other than here. Let us drift a little further now. Let the words become a little more spacious. Let the silences between the phrases lengthen. Let the voice that is reading these words in your mind begin to sound like something heard from a very great distance, like music coming from another room, present but not pressing, there but not demanding. There is a place just below the surface of waking consciousness, a place you visit every night without realizing it. It is the borderland between thinking and dreaming, where the sharp edges of things begin to blur, where time starts to behave strangely, where the body grows very heavy and the mind grows very light, where thoughts begin to drift free of their usual logic and float in more spacious and associative patterns. You know this place. You have been visiting it every night of your life. It is where the daytime self begins its nightly dissolving, where the voice in your head finally slows to a murmur, and then to a whisper, and then to the barest thread of sound, and then to silence, and then to the deep currents of dream, or the profound quiet of dreamless sleep, where even the awareness of awareness dissolves into something so still and so complete that there is nothing left to know that anything is or is not happening. And we do not fear that place, not really, even though the voice in your head sometimes generates anxiety about sleep, about losing consciousness, about the small daily death of the waking self. Deeper than that anxiety, there is something that knows this place is safe, that knows this nightly dissolution is restorative, that understands at some level below language that the self that falls asleep will arise again in the morning, refreshed, reconstituted, having been nourished by the deep wells of unconscious restoration. So we go willingly. We let ourselves be carried. We offer no more resistance to the coming of sleep than the night offers resistance to the coming of morning, naturally, simply, without argument. Alan Watts had a profound love of the night, of the darkness, of the way that night restores what day consumes. He felt that Western culture had developed an unfortunate hostility toward darkness, toward the unconscious, toward sleep and dreams, and all that lies below the threshold of rational control, and that this hostility was itself a form of the same egoic anxiety that drove the voice in the head to keep talking, the same fear of losing control, the
same reluctance to release the grip on the narrative self. But the night is not hostile. The darkness is not threatening. The dissolution of the waking self into sleep is not a loss. It is a return, a nightly homecoming to the ground from which the waking self arises each morning, renewed and ready, if it chooses, to see the day a little more clearly, to hold the self a little more lightly, to live a little more from the open awareness of the sky, rather than the identification with the transient clouds. Let the darkness hold you tonight. Let it be the warm embrace of something ancient and trustworthy, something that has been receiving the tired and the troubled and the ordinary human beings at the end of their ordinary human days, for as long as there have been days and nights to alternate. Let it receive you as it has always received you, without judgment, without expectation, without requiring anything from you except your willingness to let go. And as you drift, as the thoughts begin to lose their sharp edges and their urgent tones, as the voice in your head begins its nightly softening, notice that the awareness is still here, still receiving, still knowing that this is happening, even as the content of what it knows grows simpler and quieter and less defined. Awareness does not sleep. Awareness witnesses sleep. Awareness witnesses the thoughts slow and dissolve. Awareness witnesses the body growing heavy and still. And at some point, that awareness itself submerges into something too deep to be witnessed, and there is simply the vast oceanic quiet of dreamless sleep, and the self that was watching is itself gone, dissolved into the source, resting in the ground. And then, in the morning, it will arise again, as it always has, as it always will, for whatever mornings remain, fresh from the deep, carrying with it perhaps some faint resonance of what it means to be not only the voice and the story and the striving self, but also the awareness, the sky, the ocean, the night, the ground that holds everything. Let yourself go there now. There is nothing more to understand tonight,
nothing more to figure out, nothing that needs your vigilance or your management or your most careful thinking. The world will still be here in the morning. Your life will still be there. The familiar challenges and the familiar joys, the people you love and the work you do, and the whole beautiful and complicated texture of being this particular person in this particular life. All of that waits for you patiently. None of it requires your attention right now. Right now there is only this, the breath, easier now than when we began, the body, heavier and warmer and more still, the mind, quieter, the voice, softer, the awareness, vast and open and completely at ease. Just this, just here, just now, and now, and now. Floating, settling, softening, releasing. The voice in your head is not you, and now you know it, and knowing it, you are free. Free to rest, free to dissolve, free to let the night receive you, free to be held by the vast and patient ground of everything. Sleep now, simply and completely, the way a wave returns to the ocean, the way a leaf returns to the earth, the way the breath returns to silence between the out and the in. There, just there, right there, in that space where the voice has finally, gently let go. Rest. The awareness remains open and still and profoundly at ease. And you, whatever you truly are home. Good night.